Stalwart Reverend Frank Chikane's testimony at the inquest into Neil Aggett's death. We cross now to my colleague Hasina Gori. Thanks very much, Hasina, for joining us. Again, more testimony coming from Reverend Chikane about the awful conditions that he was subjected to, pretty similar to what Barbara Hogan was saying yesterday.
Yes, as you mentioned, Nombu, we were hearing from Struggle Stalwart and Reverend Frank Chikane. He just completed his evidence this afternoon. He detailed some of the trauma and the gruesome abuse that he went through. He said it was quite traumatic to relive this memory, and he didn't want to speak much about it, and he had come here to assist in bringing about the truth about what happened to Unionist and Dr. Neil Aggett while he was in John Foster. As we know, he saw Neil Aggett at least a week before he was killed and found hanging in his cell in John Foster. He described how they were all kept at that point in an L-shaped corridor, and Neil was next to him in the cell. And he described that that day he saw Aggett through the peephole in his cell. He could hear him come first, and as he turned the corridor, he saw him. He said he was staggering. He described him in his first evidence in the last inquiry in 1982 as a man that was broken. He described that he was walking quite slowly and said he looked like a patient that was being assisted back into his cell. He said it was a very slow walk, and he looked quite defeated. He said it also looked very weak, and that was the last time that he saw Aggett alive. He also said that he did not hear from the security branch that Aggett had died. He actually heard from one of the normal uniformed police officers, a black police officer, who was sympathetic to many of the political detainees and just told him that Aggett had died, but he wasn't told the circumstances around his death and how exactly he had passed on. He also described his torture that he went through. Chikane said that he would be made to stand for 48 hours, and they were asked the same question over and over, sometimes to self-incriminate themselves, and other time to give statements on other political detainees, sometimes on subjects he had no knowledge of, and to write statements that weren't true. And he said that sometimes in this brutal psychological torture, sometimes you'd want to break and just sign it, but he would never do that under oath, and they would get angry. He said sometimes they'd break and come back even more angrier. He described how he was kept awake and sleep deprived for almost 48 hours. He was chained to a heater, similar to the kind of abuse we heard and the assault we heard from Barbara Hogan yesterday.
So, Hasina, what was he saying about the kind of punishment that was meted out to officers who were sympathetic to their situation?
He did mention that some would be then discharged from their duties, but also we heard from one of the police officers earlier in the week who described how black police officers were also subjected to abuse and assault. They were called the K-word, they were called other derogatory terms, they were made to do menial labors, and they weren't part of the interrogation per se, but were there to act as translators or to clean cells and to make tea for their white counterparts. One officer, we were told, who tried to get a message from a prisoner to his family was discharged from his duties. So this was some of the punishment that was mitigated to those officers who were sympathetic to political detainees and did try to assist them or give them cryptic message, and if they were found out, they would then be punished or discharged.
Thanks very much for that report, Hasina. My colleague there, Hasina Gori. Over to you, Nzinga.